The scent of burning cedar choked the air, thick and sweet. It mingled with blood, dust, and the raw fear of 1,000 screaming voices. In Jerusalem, in 70 CE, the world was ending. Roman legions, a relentless tide of iron and fury, breached the final defences. The city, once a beacon, now bled. Imagine a boy 10 years old named Judah. He clutched his mother's hand, his face streaked with soot, his eyes wide with terror. The ground trembled from the relentless assault on the Temple Mount. He heard the roar of Roman soldiers, the guttural cries of men fighting for a homeland slipping through their fingers. His mother pulled him close, her body a shield, her whispered prayers a desperate plea. The Second Temple, the sacred heart of their world, glowed with infernal light. Not divine radiance, but the hungry, all-consuming fire of conquest. Flames licked at the sky, devouring gilded gates, holy chambers, stones imbued with centuries of prayer. It was more than a building burning. It was an identity, a covenant, a way of life. Its collapse, a thunderous groan, echoed the shattering of a people's soul. Jerusalem, their anchor, their North Star, was extinguished. A pillar of smoke replaced it, visible for miles. The Romans under Titus had scattered a nation, an existential cataclysm. Home, belonging, ripped from an entire people. Where do you go when your sacred city is ashes, your temple rubble? How does a people, defined by their land, survive when both are taken? This is the 2,000-year journey of a people cast out, dispersed across 109 countries, yet remaining one story. Judah and his mother were among thousands who escaped, a tide of refugees flowing from the burning city. They walked east, then north, then west, their feet treading paths soon worn by millions. Each step was further from home, deeper into the unknown. They carried what little they could, a worn scroll, a small lamp, the memory of a city that would forever haunt their dreams. More than possessions, they carried an intangible resolve, to remember, to transmit, to endure. The Roman Empire, vast and seemingly eternal, believed it had delivered a final decisive blow. It shattered a troublesome province, erased a defiant people. Triumphal arches were erected, coins minted proclaiming Judea capta. They believed they had written the last chapter. But history, as it often does, had a different script. The survivors found themselves adrift, on small islands in a vast indifferent sea. They moved to Antioch, to Alexandria, to Rome, to countless towns. They were strangers in strange lands, carrying monumental loss, yet also the spark of unyielding hope. They had lost their physical home, yes, but their spiritual home remained within. The challenge: keep that spirit alive. Rebuild not with stone, but with stories, laws, and dreams. How do you maintain identity when the world conspires to erase it? That question would define the next 2 millennia. Before we delve deeper into this incredible journey, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. If this story captivates you, subscribe, like, and share. Your engagement helps us bring these vital stories to life. The destruction of the temple was not an end, but a beginning. An exile so profound, so long, it would reshape the Jewish people and the very fabric of human civilization. A journey that would take them from sun-baked deserts to icy steppes, from bustling markets to distant shores. But how would they carry their heritage across such distances, through such perils? The dust of Jerusalem had barely settled, yet the struggle for survival had already begun. The thousands who fled, like Judah and his mother, carried not only the trauma of loss, but also an urgent question. How do you rebuild when the foundation itself is gone? Their sacred temple, the very heart of their worship for centuries, lay in ruins. Without it, how could they connect with the divine? How could they remain a people? This moment of utter devastation sparked one of history's most profound acts of spiritual innovation. The Jewish people, stripped of their land and their central sanctuary, did not despair. Instead, they performed an alchemy of faith, transforming physical structures into portable principles. The temple was gone, but the spirit of worship, the essence of their covenant, had to endure. This transformation was embodied in the rise of the synagogue and the elevation of the Torah, the sacred texts, to paramount importance. No longer would sacrifice be the primary form of worship. Prayer, study, and good deeds would take its place. The synagogue, once a secondary gathering place, became the portable temple, a miniature sanctuary that could be established wherever 10 Jews gathered. The Torah scroll, meticulously copied, became the physical manifestation of God's presence, carried from town to town, from land to land. Imagine a man named Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, a sage who, according to legend, was smuggled out of besieged Jerusalem in a coffin. He established a new centre of learning in Yavne, a small town on the coast. Here, with the world crumbling around them, he and his fellow scholars meticulously preserved and interpreted the ancient laws, debates, and traditions. They codified the Mishnah, an oral law that would become the backbone of rabbinic Judaism. It was an act of audacious defiance, rebuilding a spiritual nation brick by brick, not with stone but with words. These early communities, scattered across the Roman Empire and beyond, faced immense pressure. They were a distinct minority, often viewed with suspicion, their customs alien. Yet, they held fast. Fathers taught their children the Hebrew alphabet. Mothers sang ancient lullabies. And communities gathered in their modest synagogues, sharing meals, stories, and prayers. Each Shabbat, each festival, was a defiant affirmation of identity, a thread woven into the fabric of memory, preventing it from unravelling. The Roman authorities, blind to the spiritual resilience of the people they sought to conquer, continued their oppression. New decrees forbade certain practices, taxes were levied, and the threat of violence was ever present. Yet, the Jewish people persisted. From Alexandria to Babylon, from Rome to the nascent communities in Gaul and Hispania, they established schools, courts, and welfare systems. They became masters of adapting, of thriving in diverse cultural landscapes while maintaining their unique heritage. The journey was just beginning. The small, scattered communities were like seeds blown by the wind, landing in fertile ground and hostile soil alike. They learned to build homes not just of wood and stone, but of shared language, shared law, and shared longing for a return. This invisible architecture of faith and culture would prove far more resilient than any physical structure. Think about that for a moment. What is the most powerful force for keeping a culture alive without a homeland? Is it language, faith, or shared memory? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. But the world was vast and empires rose and fell with terrifying regularity. The Romans were not the last to challenge their existence, nor would they be the last to scatter them further. The path ahead was fraught with new dangers, new persecutions, and new, unimaginable distances. How would these small, fragile communities navigate the shifting sands of history, carrying their precious heritage across continents and centuries? Centuries rolled by. The Roman Empire, once an unshakable colossus, fractured and faded. New powers emerged. Byzantium in the east, the burgeoning Islamic caliphates across North Africa and the Middle East, and later, the fragmented kingdoms of medieval Europe. For the Jewish people, the exile deepened, their journey taking them to every corner of the known world, often at the crossroads of these colliding civilizations. The early medieval period saw a significant dispersion, from the lands of ancient Babylonia, where a vibrant Jewish community had flourished for over 1,000 years, to the expanding Islamic world and into the emerging Christian kingdoms of Europe. Each new land presented unique challenges and opportunities. In some places they found relative tolerance and even prosperity. In others, suspicion and persecution were the norm. Consider the story of a merchant named Isaac, living in Baghdad in the 9th century. Baghdad, the heart of the Abbasid Caliphate, was a glittering metropolis, a centre of learning and trade. Isaac was a Radhanite merchant, one of a legendary group of Jewish traders who traversed vast distances from Western Europe to China. He spoke multiple languages: Arabic, Persian, Greek, perhaps even a smattering of Chinese. He carried spices, silks, precious stones, and knowledge. He also carried his heritage, his prayers, his laws, his stories. Isaac's life was a testament to adaptation. He navigated complex political landscapes, built networks of trust across cultures, and contributed significantly to the economic and intellectual life of the Islamic Golden Age. Jewish scholars in places like Baghdad, Cordoba, and Cairo translated Greek texts into Arabic, making ancient wisdom accessible and contributed to medicine, philosophy, astronomy, and mathematics. They were cultural bridges, facilitating the exchange of ideas between East and West, between the classical world and the emerging Islamic one. But this period of relative flourishing was often punctuated by periods of intense persecution. In Christian Europe, particularly as the Crusades gained momentum in the 11th and 12th centuries, the position of Jews deteriorated sharply. They were often scapegoated, accused of deicide, and subjected to forced conversions, expulsions, and massacres. The First Crusade, intended to liberate Jerusalem, instead unleashed a wave of violence against Jewish communities along the Rhine River. Imagine a family in Mainz, Germany, in the year 1096. The father, a scholar, the mother, a weaver. News arrived of Crusader armies approaching, their fervour fuelled by religious zeal. Panic spread. The community gathered in the synagogue, praying, debating, making impossible choices. Some chose conversion, others resistance, many faced martyrdom. The horrific events that unfolded in cities like Mainz, Worms and Speyer were a brutal reminder of their precarious existence in a world increasingly hostile. The contrast was stark. In the Islamic world, a vibrant intellectual and economic life, albeit with periods of hardship. In much of Christian Europe, a deepening chasm of suspicion and violence. Yet, through it all, the Jewish people continued to innovate. They developed sophisticated legal systems, rich poetic traditions, and philosophical schools of thought that grappled with questions of faith, exile, and redemption. Their resilience was not passive, it was an active, continuous act of creation and preservation. This constant oscillation between periods of integration and periods of isolation, between acceptance and rejection, forged a unique identity. It taught them to be adaptable, to be resourceful, and to rely on their internal strength. But the pressures were immense, and the expulsions from European kingdoms were only just beginning. What would happen when entire nations decided they no longer wanted them? Where would they go then, and how would they carry their world with them? The pattern solidified, periods of stability, often followed by sudden brutal expulsions. From England in 1290 to France in 1394 to Spain in 1492, entire Jewish communities were uprooted, forced to leave behind centuries of history, property, and familiar surroundings. This wasn't merely relocation, it was a systematic tearing apart of lives, a forced march into uncertainty. The expulsion from Spain in 1492 stands as a monumental turning point. After nearly 800 years of a vibrant, often flourishing presence, Spanish Jews, known as Sephardim, were given an impossible choice: convert to Catholicism or leave. Hundreds of thousands chose exile. They boarded ships, walked across borders, and sought refuge in Portugal, North Africa, the Ottoman Empire, and eventually, the New World. Imagine a woman named Mariam, a respected physician in Toledo, in the spring of 1492. Her family had lived in Spain for generations, speaking Ladino, a Judeo-Spanish dialect, and preserving their traditions. Now, everything was shattered. Her home, her practice, her community, all were to be abandoned. She packed what little she could carry, a few books, some precious family heirlooms, and her medical instruments. The journey was arduous, filled with hunger, illness, and the constant threat of bandits. Her destination, like that of so many others, was unknown, driven only by the hope of finding a place where they could live and worship freely. The Ottoman Empire, under Sultan Bayezid II, famously welcomed these exiles, recognizing their skills and contributions. They settled in cities like Salonika, Constantinople, and Safed, bringing with them their advanced knowledge of medicine, cartography, and trade. They established new communities, built synagogues, and maintained their distinct culture, language, and spiritual practices. This was a testament to the enduring power of their internal portable temple. Yet, even in these new havens, life was rarely without challenges. They were still minorities, subject to the whims of rulers and the prejudices of populations. And in Europe, the situation often worsened. The rise of nation-states, coupled with religious fervour, led to the creation of ghettos, segregated urban areas where Jews were confined, often under harsh conditions. The very word ghetto became synonymous with isolation and oppression. The 18th and 19th centuries brought glimmers of hope with the Enlightenment and the promise of emancipation. In some parts of Western Europe, Jews began to gain civil rights, participate in broader society, and contribute to art, science, and philosophy. Think of the dazzling intellectual and cultural flowering in places like Vienna and Berlin. But even this progress was often fragile, easily undone by resurgent waves of anti-Semitism, culminating in the horrific pogroms in Eastern Europe and Russia. A young man, Mendel, living in a small shtetl in Ukraine in the late 1800s, experienced this duality. He yearned for the wider world, for education and opportunity. But the constant threat of violence, the arbitrary restrictions, and the deep-seated hatred made his dreams feel distant, almost impossible. His family's stories were filled with migrations, with escapes, with a constant fear of the knock on the door. He knew that the endless road was not just a metaphor, it was his inheritance. Through every expulsion, every new settlement, every moment of despair and hope, the Jewish people carried their story. They adapted, they innovated, they remembered. They understood that their survival depended not on physical borders, but on the unbreakable bonds of heritage and shared experience. But the 20th century would bring a challenge of unprecedented scale, a darkness so profound it threatened to extinguish the very flame they had guarded for 2,000 years. How could a people survive a systematic attempt to erase them from the face of the earth? This question, more than any other, would test their ancient resilience. The 20th century arrived, promising progress, but instead delivered a darkness so profound it threatened to extinguish the very flame the Jewish people had guarded for 2,000 years. The ancient hatreds, simmering for centuries, erupted with unprecedented ferocity, fueled by a new, terrifying ideology. The Holocaust was not just another persecution, it was a systematic, industrialized attempt to erase an entire people from the face of the earth. Imagine a young woman, Sarah, from a vibrant community in Warsaw in 1943. She had heard the stories of expulsions, of pogroms, of constant wandering, but nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared her for the reality of the ghettos, the trains, the death camps. She witnessed the systematic dehumanization, the starvation, the cold, the casual cruelty. For when she saw her family, her friends, her entire world reduced to numbers, then to ash. 6 million lives, 6 million unique stories, extinguished in a deliberate act of genocide. It was the ultimate test of survival, a moment when the very idea of a portable temple seemed impossible against such overwhelming evil. The world watched, often in silence, as the greatest crime in human history unfolded. When the camps were liberated, the sheer scale of the horror became undeniable. Europe was a graveyard for millions of Jews, and the survivors, emaciated and traumatized, emerged into a world that still struggled to comprehend what had happened. The notion of home was utterly shattered for them, not just by exile but by absolute annihilation. It seemed for a time that the 2,000-year story had reached its tragic final chapter. Yes, but from the depths of this unimaginable destruction, something unexpected, something monumental began to emerge. The Holocaust, in its horrific clarity, solidified a stark realization. A people, no matter how resilient, could not forever rely on the goodwill of others. They needed a place of their own, a sovereign home where they could determine their own destiny, defend themselves, and live without fear. The ancient longing for Zion, the ancestral homeland, transformed from a spiritual yearning into an urgent political necessity. In 1948, after 2 millennia of exile and dispersion, the State of Israel was declared. It was an act of audacious self-determination, a phoenix rising from the ashes of unimaginable loss. For many survivors, for many Jews worldwide, it was the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy, a reclamation of a land that had never left their prayers. They returned to the desert soil, building cities, reviving an ancient language, and forging a modern nation. The destruction of 6 million lives, the ultimate attempt to end their story, instead became the catalyst for the ultimate act of rebirth. Yet, even with a homeland, the story of the Jewish people did not cease to be a global one. While millions made Aliyah, returning to Israel, millions more continued to thrive in communities across the globe, in America, in Europe, in Australia, in South America. The portable temple of synagogue, Torah, and shared memory continued to flourish. demonstrating that identity could be maintained both within a sovereign state and across a vast diaspora. So how did a people, defined by their land, survive when both were taken? How did they maintain identity when the world conspired to erase it? They survived by transforming their faith into a portable sanctuary, by weaving their history into an unbreakable tapestry of memory, and ultimately by reclaiming their ancient home. The story of the Jewish exile is not just a tale of persecution and wandering, it is a testament to the enduring power of human spirit, to the unwavering commitment to heritage, and to the profound truth that a people can carry their world within them, across 1,000 borders and 2,000 years. Their history, once confined to an ancient land, now pulses in 109 countries, a living, breathing testament to an unyielding will to be. What aspect of this 2,000-year journey surprised you the most, or made you see history in a new light? Share your thoughts in the comments below.